Welcome back to class. This is our first presentation of Chapter 10 on Congress. We are now moving into the constitutional institutions of the government, those institutions that are actually enumerated in the Constitution, described, and their powers and the requirements for serving are clearly delineated in the Constitution. So let's jump in. Here are the key topics. This is again the organization of the chapter. I will not insult your intelligence by reading them off to you. There you go. And here are the key learning objectives. Again, these are the things we expect you to be able to do, having read the material and worked through the exercises in this folder. All right, into it. So, what government does and why it matters. In October 2021, you had a Facebook whistleblower that began issuing testimony. She was invited to appear before Congress. Frances Haugen was a former product manager for Facebook. She testified before the Senate Commerce Subcommittee on Consumer Protection that Facebook designed its algorithms to amplify information to keep people using their sites longer. She supported her testimony with thousands of internal documents she leaked to the media. She testified that Facebook's executives knew that vulnerable people were particularly susceptible to harmful content, particularly noting that teens exposed to information made them feel bad about you had body dysmorphia and all these kinds of things, and that isolated adults like widows or recently divorced individuals were also extremely vulnerable. So an important point, social media basically has a free hand in marketing dangerous programming. In 1996, Congress passed the Communications Decency Act, which included Section 230, that protected internet companies from legal liability for content posted by its users. As a result of Section 230, technology companies can't be sued by their users. So despite calls for reform, social media lobbyists have effectively been able to stymie legislation. Effectively, social media companies are in a position of being able to say, no, we're just a platform. We don't actually, we don't tell people what to do. We don't tell people what to consume. So the expansion of social media and the rise of concerns over the negative effects of misinformation creates some real challenges from a legislative perspective. In 2005, only about 5% of American adults used social media. By 2021, 72% of Americans use social media to some extent. And you increasingly, as a result of Haugen's testimony, you got bipartisan expressions of outrage at her testimony. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal stated parents across America are deeply disturbed by reports that Facebook knew that Instagram could harm children's mental health. Similarly, Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker declared the tech gods have been demystified. The children of America are hooked on their product. This is cynical knowledge on behalf of these big tech companies. Again, these are very damning things to be saying. Ultimately, though, nothing happens. Okay, so Congress basically has enormous authority. The vesting clause of Article 1 grants Congress enormous authority to legislate on many aspects of American life. Congress controls everything related to taxing and spending. Congress can regulate products like those offered by social media, again, if they choose to. But we need an alert citizenry to keep themselves appraised of congressional activities and inaction. Frequently, the fierce debates and overheated partisanship is simply a smokescreen. The example of Congress's failure to reform Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act illustrates the potential of Congress to affect Americans' everyday lives, both through their actions and their inactions. So Congress is supposed to represent the American people. Now, that idea of representation, what does it really mean? It means that we elect people and they are supposed to act on our behalf. The challenge there is, it creates this thing called the principal agent problem, right? They are our agent. But they are the agents of, close to 1 million people, members of the House of Representatives. And, if you're a senator, you represent maybe tens of millions of people. So how do you do that effectively? That's a real challenge. So what is a constituency? The two houses of Congress are the most important representative institutions in American government. A House member or a senator, they represent residents in the area from which an official is elected. So to illustrate the differences in constituencies, Oklahoma Senator Mark Wayne Mullen now represents all of the citizens of Oklahoma, while Representative Josh Burkeen, who is elected out of the 2nd District, which includes Rogers State University, now represents all Oklahomans living in the 2nd District, which includes most of the eastern end of Oklahoma, including large parts of Green Country where we are, and also Little Dixie, which is the southern part, the southeastern part of Oklahoma. So there are differences in representation. The Constitution's framers provided for a bicameral legislature with 2 chambers that serve very different constituencies. So while members of the House are elected directly by the people from federal districts, members of the Senate were initially selected by state legislatures. The original intent of the framers was for the members of the Senate to represent the interests of the states. Today, with the ratification of the 17th Amendment, senators are now elected by the people via statewide vote. The House and the Senate, again, play very different roles in the legislative process. The House is more centralized and the better organized the two bodies because it is far larger in composition. Constitutionally, all revenue bills must originate in the House of Representatives. The Senate is a smaller and designed to be a more deliberative body with no rules governing debate. The Senate's leadership has less power. There are a number of formal and informal factors that contribute to differences between the two chambers. The formal factors include the different lengths in the terms of office for House and Senate members. House members serve 2 years and senators serve 6 years. Additionally, the relatively small size and relatively uniform nature of House constituencies, combined with the need to seek re-election every 2 years, make members of the House more sensitive to the immediate legislative needs of powerful interest groups in their districts. So differences, again, this is sort of highlighting that. Again, to be a member of the House, the minimum age, you have to be 25. For the Senate, you have to be 30. You have to have been a U.S. citizen for at least 7 years for the House, at least 9 years for the Senate. The terms are, again, 2 years and 6 years. The number representing each state, it can go from 1. If you're, from Wyoming, they have 1 at-large member. There are a number of other states that only have 1. And then up to 52, members of California, there are 52. I think there might be, I think it's still 52. And then there is a constitutional guarantee that each state will have 2 senators. Again, their constituencies are very different as well. So there's a number of different theories about how members of Congress represent people. You have the trustee model and the delegate model. The trustee model is basically a model of representation where representatives vote based on what they think is best for their constituency. They rely on their own best judgment, which oftentimes run the risk of being viewed as out of touch by their constituents. The delegate model is a model of representation where representatives act according to what they think the wishes of their constituency are. They are required to maintain constant contact, and again, that runs the risk of basically appearing to be beholden to the powerful interests of their state or their district. You also have the descriptive versus substantive views of representation. The descriptive idea of representation means that people should have the same racial, gender, ethnic, religious, or educational backgrounds. The principle at the heart of this model is that people from similar backgrounds will be more likely to reflect the views of the people sharing that background. Substantive representation means that representatives are held accountable for failing to properly represent the constituency. You have heightened incentives when a representative's personal background differ from his or her constituency. There have been a number of instances where you've had, for example, liberal whites representing largely black districts. This is what, and this is what occurred with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You had a guy who was an Irishman, liberal Democrat, member of House leadership, who, basically the composition of his district changed over the course of his time in office. He'd been in office for close to 20 years. By the time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez challenged him, the district was largely Hispanic, and she spoke Spanish. She got out in the street. She, ran a good campaign, and the result is she ended up winning a primary challenge. The social composition of Congress, the degree to which Congress is sociologically representative has historically been a cause of concern. Members of Congress tend to come from professional backgrounds. Lawyers are strongly overrepresented in Congress. On average, members of Congress are older, whiter, and wealthier. Black and Hispanic and Asian Americans have increased their representation, but they remain underrepresented. For example, blacks are 13.4% of the population, but 11% of the representatives. Hispanics are even more underrepresented. They're 18.1% of the population, but only 8% of representatives are Hispanic. So again, these are challenges. Women continue to have less representation in proportion of the population that the population would otherwise suggest. Despite the lack of representativeness, members of Congress can serve as agents of their constituents. But the social composition of Congress is important for symbolic as well as for practical purposes. This is something, again, I mentioned earlier, that Republicans were concerned that they were becoming the party of white, older, conservative Americans, and they have worked over the course of the past decade to recruit more women and more members of color to avoid that blending that impression. Again, diversity in Congress, it is improving, but again, it is still lagging to some extent, and some folks are disappointed at the slowness of progress. And the last slide, women's legislative representation. Again, America is not doing as well as some countries. And again, part of the reason why some countries do better is that they have constitutional requirements that women, that there are a certain number of women within their legislative bodies. And that's something that I think most Americans would probably balk at, because it would be a quota. It is a quota. And most Americans seem to have a problem with the idea of quotas. So that's it for this presentation. When we come back, we will continue our discussion of Congress. I'll see you next time.